Hello everyone, my name is Josh and this is Whimsical and Interesting Musings, and today I'm going to be talking about a book called The Casual Vacancy by J.K Rowling. Now this was published in 2012, so this was literally the first book that she had published after the success and the completion of the Harry Potter series with Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows in 2007. So what's the story of The Casual Vacancy? Well, it basically follows the small town of Pagford. It's a very idyllic, very quintessential English town in the northwest of England, and it has a very big tragedy hit it at the very start of the book. A man by the name of Barry Fairbrother, who is a very vocal member and occupies a very, prestigious seat on the parish council, dies of a brain aneurysm while he's taking his estranged wife Mary out to dinner. And with this shocking loss comes a great hole and a great loss for some people, but for other people it presents an opportunity as a council election begins to pretty much take up Barry's vacant seat. Now, this particular book is about many different things, but what this book is about is it's about class and about how various different classes view each other. Like, say, for example, a good portion of this town are middle class, essentially, and they essentially look on this neighbouring estate called the Fields with a little bit of disdain and a little bit of, hatred, and they're not very keen on it in the sense that it doesn't really make their village look good. They want to represent their village as a very, quaint, idyllic village, but this kind of council estate with drug addicts, prostitutes, and all sorts of other things, graffitied homes and walls and things like that, isn't going to be a very good image for a very idyllic-looking town across the way. So a group of people, particularly the Mollisons, Howard, his wife Shirley, and their son Miles, try to basically stage this election so that their son can get elected into Barry's seat so that they can have the Fields removed to a neighbouring town. Joining them on the opposition's side is a GP known as Parminder Juwanda, who is a GP, and she is also a practising Sikh with her family. And she pretty much is on the side of keeping the Fields active. But what's the biggest problem is she kind of feels frustrated because she's surrounded by a man who clearly is... She's surrounded by, a rival who is a total ignorant man whose name is Howard, and he kind of, just keeps calling her all sorts of different things. Some of them are very offensive, and you really do get this sense that she really feels very frustrated with him because he keeps on talking about things like, if you're dealing with drug addicts, why don't you just tell them to get the hell off the drugs? And there's even a moment in the book where she literally shouts at him and says, well, if you look at it that way, then you will quite happily see that, the same could be applied to you. Like, you eat a lot and you're very overweight and you run a delicatessen, so that can't help things either. So why don't you just cut down on your food and lose weight if you want to lose weight and live longer? I can't say that to you, and you expect me to kind of, change if you're going to say stuff like that. So that was her way of basically saying you can't just tell an addict to get off the drugs or to lose the drugs, because sometimes with addictions, it takes more than just, you telling someone that they need to get themselves off it. You need to actually really kind of almost recondition them almost. So I know that's probably not the right word to use. It was probably a little bit too blunt of a word to use, but you've almost got to recondition them not to associate drugs with pleasure almost. That you've got to do this entire psychological process and these various different programs. So there's a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, Sukhvinder Jawanda is one candidate. Another candidate is the deputy head of a comprehensive school known as St Thomas's. And he basically has a severe form of OCD to the point where he literally feels like he can't trust his own senses, and he literally fears the worst of all sorts of different things. And he really is one of those characters that I really did feel sorry for, because he was very close to Barry Fairbrother, and he begins to get very anxious about occupying his seat now that he's passed. But what also is really interesting is that he is a character who has a son called Stuart who absolutely hates his guts, and he takes every single opportunity to basically bring him down and make him feel less good about himself, and really kind of, makes him feel, pardon my French, a little bit shit about himself. And he does it deliberately. Fats does this deliberately. That's his nickname. And he's actually not a very he's actually a really horrible person. I actually really hated this character with a passion. People say that Joffrey was the worst in Game of Thrones, and while I can agree he is the worst, I think Fats Wall is a equally horrible person in that same respect, because the fact that he literally comes from this, let's face it, he is this very he lives this very almost very privileged existence. He's a teenager. He lives this very privileged existence. He can come and go when he pleases. He can go, as long as he goes to school, does his studies, and does well, he can pretty much do whatever the hell he wants. But the fact that he continuously, tries to undermine both his parents, it really goes to show that he literally doesn't understand how lucky he is. Because he has a friend called Andrew Price, and his father is also a candidate for the election. But also he is an abusive arsehole, and his name is Simon. So he literally is the worst person. I hate Simon more than I hate Fats, but I think, both of them, if you were to put them in a room, they would probably tear each other to pieces. And I would not care about which one lost or won, because they're both equally horrible. I think Simon's worse because he literally assaults people. He literally, beats his own sons. He calls his son Andrew pizza face continuously. He makes his wife, who loves him dearly and tries to support him, feel like crap every single chance she gets. Her name's Ruth, and she's a doctor or a nurse at the local hospital. And he just literally isn't a very nice person. And then and that's all the candidates. And they basically are trying to fight to secure the Fields, whether it should stay or whether it should go. And the Fields is basically a council estate in the middle of Pagford that has a lot of, a lot of people who are either homeless, destitute, living on benefits, or are in the drug dealing, prostitution game, as it were. I don't really want to call it a profession, but yeah, it's on the game. But that's basically what it is, and they're trying to decide, should it stay or should it go. And as the council elections are underway, the teenagers, Andrew, Fats, and Parminder Jawanda's daughter, Sukhvinder, decide to hack the council website and post messages on the message board under the pseudonym of the Ghost of Barry Fairbrother. And this is basically a way of airing out all their dirty little secrets, all the council members' dirty little secrets, so everybody gets gunned down for this particular activity. And it's really a fantastic way of kind of showing that these characters are due their little bit of vengeance, I think, because they both, in terms of, Andrew Price and, Sukhvinder, they don't really have a very happy life. They're teenagers, they're going through a lot, of, things emotionally, they've also got a lot of pressure academically to do well, but they're also kind of, in this very privileged position, but they're also kind of, not very happy in their lives because their families are so focused on this council election that they're not focusing on them. And that's something that really is quite an interesting thing. So when they actually go into these elections and they find that they can, actually twist the hand a little bit and actually try to say, well, look, we can be in a position of power too. We have the power to stop you in these horrible things that you're doing, in these selfish things that you're doing. it really does add another layer to the idea that, yes, the main theme of this particular novel is the idea of responsibility, the idea of basically how much are we responsible for our own happiness, how much are we responsible for the happiness of others, and how much are we responsible for, the happiness of our family and our friends. And sometimes when you're trying to do something good for a certain community, you sometimes can lose track, and you can sometimes be so passionate about one thing and helping other people that you're kind of forgetting that, you have teenagers and children who are going through shit of their own that they need help with, and they need your guidance and your support with, that you're not actually willing to help them with because you're so focused on this election. So the idea of basically taking these characters who are, if we're gonna take it into a matter of good and evil, or good and bad, they're the winners. Sukvin and Parminder Jawanda and her other council members, Colin Wall, and Simon Price isn't a good person. In fact, you don't really know whether he actually is going to make any positive changes towards the fields. He just wants to stand for election for his own needs and his own benefit, essentially. But the two of those council members are actually good people, and they actually do see the best in this situation, but they're not very good. Well, Parminder Jawanda isn't a good mother to her daughter because she feels so, wrapped up in her job, in her role as a council elector, or electee, to actually really pay attention to her daughter. And she has 3 other children, I think, if I remember correctly, as well. So she really has a lot on her plate, but she kind of has let her job consume her a little bit. So that kind of gives this almost, this really horrifying, degree of expectation towards her own children, where she kind of feels like she picks on Sukhvinder, her teenage daughter, more than most in her family, because she expected so much from her, but then she just feels like her daughter's let her down constantly. And what I really love about this book is they actually show a good portion of the drama through the point of view of the teenagers, that they are kind of caving under the pressure that their parents are giving them. And this leads one of the characters to self-harm, and it really is quite heartbreaking to watch, but to read about, but you really do get a sense that there is actually a genuine sense of, you actually are kind of rooting for this teenager to kind of shake their parents and tell them, what about me? What about, what we're going through, what our family's going through? You're not paying attention to that. And I think that was actually a very brave thing to do, because a lot of authors would try to champion the good people, but really they're just basically saying, well, these people they're not perfect either. They've done, they've messed up, they've made mistakes. And I think that's a very, powerful thing that this book does. But what's at the real heart of this story is a character called Crystal Whedon, who is a teenager. She has a mum who is a drug addict, and she has a little baby brother called Robbie, who she basically has to look after and be the mum of, while her mother Terry is in her drug-addled and, at a certain point in the story, near rehabilitated phase of her addiction trials. And it's really, difficult to watch, because she is a very difficult character to like. She is very ill-mannered. She does swear a lot. She does do a lot of things that, you wouldn't approve of. She bullies a lot of people. She can be very, argumentative. If, like, a much more realistic and very almost, sad and, relatable version of Lauren Cooper from the Catherine Tate show, like, Am I Bothered kind of thing. But she is a character who you really do see a lot of, you do see a lot of, heart there, and a lot of, care, especially when it comes to a little brother. And I really do think that her parts were the saddest part of the book, I think, because you really do see that she had a very, strong mentor relationship with the character who died, Barry Fairbrother, and he actually saw a little bit of potential in her to do great things, and it was almost, diminished as soon as he died, where she kind of felt like she had no one to turn to. she had no one to really comfort her, or anyone to really call a family, because it isn't really a family that she's part of. It's just three people in a house, and she doesn't really feel at home. She doesn't really feel like she's allowed to be her own person there, because she's had to be both the protector, the parent, and the, main caregiver to this child who is essentially her brother. And it is a very sad. Her sections were very sad to watch. In fact, I actually had to literally prepare myself whenever I came to a chapter that involved Crystal Whedon, because I felt like, how sad is this going to get, or how depressing is this going to get? And I don't really want to go into spoilers, but it does get to a point where I feel like it definitely does tug at your heartstrings a lot, and it definitely did affect me a lot. It did kind of make me feel sad and really unhappy for this character. But the book is, by and large, a commentary on responsibility and how much we are responsible for our own happiness, and how much are we responsible for the happiness of others. And that's the real heart of this story. And it's also a great critique on parenting and how, guardianship roles, essentially, in the sense that you can be a parent, but at the same time you've got to also take a lot of responsibility with that. You've got to, be a shoulder for them to cry, and you've got to be an ear for them to listen to. You've got to be there. You've got to put things into perspective for children, especially when they're at a teenage age. And I think that's something that's very important. And some of these characters don't know how to do that, because sometimes their teenage children are very difficult to talk to. But at the same time, you really do get a perspective that these characters are terrible, but they're also doing this. They're doing these terrible things like, taking drugs, drinking, having unprotected sex. They're doing it because they're saying, pay attention to me. Listen, I'm actually trying to, have a conversation with you. I'm actually trying to let you open up, but you're the ones who are barring me. And that's something that I found was very insightful about the book. And it really kind of showed that J.K. Rowling, among other things, knows how to do character. And when she does character, she really shines as a writer. And I feel like this book is a very character-driven book. And a lot of people do complain that there isn't that much of a story. There is a story there, it's just not the focus. And I think that's something that really is the most important thing, is the main focus is the characters and the theme of community and how much responsibility we owe each other as a community. And I think that really is one of the beating hearts of the novel. But it is just such an incredible book. I was actually quite surprised, and I wasn't just saying it from the point of view of someone who loved the writing of J.K. Rowling, because she got me into reading, and without her, I don't think I would have picked up a book at all. And I think her and Stephen King, I owe a lot of my love for reading and my love for writing. I mean, I'm trying to write my first novel right now, and I've been reading excerpts on this channel to you guys. So I actually owe a lot of my career to the likes of J.K. Rowling and Stephen King, because they got me into reading, and they really made me enjoy reading it and find the joy in reading for the most part. So I owe a lot to them in many ways. And I wasn't just coming at this book as a lover initially. I wasn't going into it thinking that I wanted to love it, but then at the same time I didn't go into it expecting to hate it either. I went into it kind of thinking, okay, focus and think, okay, this is an adult novel and this isn't going to be Harry Potter, but give it a chance, and if you like it, you like it, and if you don't like it, you don't like it. But yeah, I think what really is interesting is I did like it. It did have a lot of sections where I did feel they went on for a bit too long. I felt like there was a section at the part 2, because it's done in 7 parts, this whole book. During part 2, there's a section dedicated to the history of the town. And I think, even though it was interesting to see, it did kind of go on for a little bit longer than it needed. And I felt like she could have actually cut that down a little bit and actually made it a little bit more a part of the pacing of the story, like with George R. R. Martin, where he would describe certain details of the history of Westeros, but it wouldn't necessarily be a point where the story stops to just go and talk about the history of this thing. It's not like you're on a guided tour. It feels like when you're playing a game like Skyrim or any of the Elder Scrolls games, or what have you, whatever takes your fancy, and you pick up an item and it says, this item was used in the first stage of the Dragon Lords, and they used it to pretty much seal the gates of oblivion way back when in the olden days and things like that. Like, they would include details like that in these particular items that you got, but it never felt bogged down, or it never felt like you had to stop playing the game in order to get that bit of information. It came in the precise amount of tidbit information or bite-sized chunks that made it feel like you were getting this information, but you were also moving along with the story and following these characters and things like that. And I think if it was done in that way, where it felt like that was the case, they do it with character, like, say, for example, she would look at the river, like, say, for example, character Crystal would look at the river in Pagford and she would be reminded of her days on the rowing team. That was a great way of integrating character and background to a scenario. But the fact that she would spend an entire section talking about the history of Pagford from a very omniscient perspective really kind of made it a little bit more of it kind of just ground the story a little bit to a halt for me. And I really got to grips with the characters. A lot of criticisms of this particular book is that it has too many characters. And I feel like every character serves its purpose. Every character has a role to play. And sometimes the characters are very interesting. And sometimes they are just basically there to, enhance the theme, which is the casual vacancy. And what I think the casual vacancy represents, to me anyway, is the idea that when something happens to you, a space opens up inside of you, and you're constantly fighting to basically fill that empty space with something, be it food, be it drugs, be it alcohol, be it material things. We always have a casual vacancy inside us whenever we go through a big transition or a big change. Like, say, for example, there's this one character who is for the most part her marriage isn't working. She literally is going through a patch in her life where she feels like she's hit her prime, she's past her prime, she's a mother with children, and her husband doesn't feel like she doesn't feel like her husband's paying attention to her anymore because of this council election. So she feels like, oh, my daughter loves this boy band DVD that just happens to be in the DVD player when I switch on the telly one day. Oh, one of those boys looks nice, so I might as well, fantasize about him whenever my husband comes home from work and I'm feeling lonely most nights, kind of thing. It's funny and it's weird and it's awkward, but it really kind of adds a certain level of, she wants affection, and if she has to entertain a fantasy where she's literally having intercourse with a member of a boy band, it really kind of adds a certain level of humor, but it kind of represents that idea of, oh, she's filling up that, emptiness that she feels. Or say, for example, one character feels like, feels kind of empty and feels like she's worthless. She's been called names. She's been called all sorts of horrible things in her life. She's been told that she's worthless, that she'll never amount to anything. So she starts to feel like she is worthless. She is weak. She is terrible. So she starts to, take heroin. And that becomes literally her crux, to the point where she literally can't function as a mother. So she has to literally go to the Bellchapel addiction clinic, which is one of the things that is in danger of closing down aside from the Fields. And she wonders what she'll do if it does close. Like, what will she do? Will she have to go to Yarville to go to another clinic to get back on the Bellchapel program, where she literally pick up where she left off? Or will she literally be going will she literally be left abandoned to the point where she'll literally go back on the drugs? And that's such a compelling thing, because characters like Crystal's mother, Terry, for example, could very easily be just seen as infuriating. But what's very interesting is you do feel what she's going through when she is forced to get on these drugs, because her family have literally told her she's nothing for most of her life. And when you start to feel that way, when you start to feel like the Meg in your own family, that can kind of feel a little bit, that can feel a little bit demobilizing almost, where you kind of feel like you have no agency. You start thinking to yourself, oh, this must be true. Of all things, I think that really is kind of a bit relatable to a lot of people. So I think that's really kind of a well observed trait that J.K. Rowling kind of put into that character. A character that could very easily just have been written off by less talented hands as just an annoying drug addict, or an annoying person who has a bit of a drug addict problem, or has a bit of a withdrawal problem, or a bit of a addict problem. And that's something that just shows how talented J.K. Rowling as a writer is. And I definitely do think this book is worth the read. It definitely isn't as good as the Harry Potter series, or indeed her later adult series, the Corner of Strike series, but I do feel like it's one that's worth picking up, and it does have a lot more merit than just being, her first adult novel. But it is a good book. I enjoyed it. I liked the characters. I liked the relevance of the title, because it isn't just the casual vacancy of Barry Fairbrother's seat, but it's also, representative for when we go through certain periods of change, that empty space inside of us tends to open up, and we tend to fill it with all sorts of different things. It isn't just drugs and alcohol. It's food, it's intimacy, it's all sorts of different things. So it can mean all sorts of different things to different people. But what's very interesting is that the book really doesn't pick a side, and the book really kind of just basically asks you, well, what would you do? Whose side would you be on? What would you say to these council members if you were a character in this story? And it is very well done. It's very funny as well. There are a lot of very depressing scenes in this book, and a lot of mature themes, but there are a lot of funny moments. There are a lot of moments where I genuinely laughed. It is such a good book, and I really do think that if you're a fan of the Harry Potter series, stop for a moment and think to yourself, okay, this may not be Harry Potter, but I'm at least going to give it a chance, and I'm at least going to give it a moment to sink in and think, okay, would I pick this book up even if J.K. Rowling's name wasn't on the cover? That's the thing that I think a lot of people needed to sort of think about when they were picking this book up, because it just came off of the success of Harry Potter. It kind of felt like, okay, we need to expect the same standard as Harry Potter. Nothing's going to beat Harry Potter in regards to the success of J.K. Rowling's success as an author. But I think she's done a very good job with the books that she's written so far, and I really do think she really is a great writer and a great storyteller. As a person, you can definitely say she kind of is a bit half and half. She kind of has very controversial issues. But I personally do think that she is a great storyteller, and she understands how to write good characters. And for that reason, I will be praising the hell out of the Casual Vacancy. I do think more people should give it a read, and let me know what you thought of this book in the comments. Who was your favourite character, and what kind of messages and themes and ideas did you get out of the book when you read it? And if you want to see more videos, and if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Have a good day all. This has been Josh with Whimsical and Interesting Musings, and take care. Also look forward to another Christmas themed review. I'm going to be doing a movie review of Batman Returns, one of my favourite Batman movies, very soon. So look out for that. That's all for today. That's all for now. Take care. Bye-bye for now.